What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. For years now, the Kremlin has insisted that Russia's economy is resilient, adaptive, and somehow immune to the laws of gravity or laws economics that apply everywhere else. Sanctions, we adapted. Inflation, under control. Debt, manageable. Growth slowing, planning cooling. Every problem gets rebranded, every crack gets painted over, every warning gets dismissed as Western hysteria. But numbers have a nasty habit of ruining the propaganda. And right now, those numbers are screaming. Russian companies are drowning in debt, profits are shrinking, entire sectors are wobbling on the edge of stagnation, and the last institution that was supposed to act as a brake on this madness, the Central Bank of Russia, is quietly losing whatever little independence it had left. This is not a sudden collapse, no, it's worse. It's a slow-motion squeeze, where high interest rates bleed businesses dry, the war economy cannibalizes the civilian one, and the political pressure replaces economic logic. So today, let's break down how Russia got here, why the corporate sector is suffocating, what the central bank's rate cuts really mean, and why the loss of monetary independence could be the most dangerous development of them all. Let's start with the raw pressure point, debt. Not household debt, not state debt, but corporate debt. Russian businesses are now spending a record 39% of their pre-tax, pre-interest profits just to service loans. Not to invest, not to expand, not to modernize, just to pay interest. That figure did not creep up slowly, it exploded. In less than 2 years, the burden has more than tripled. In the last 9 months alone, for example, it jumped by 1.5 times. That's not a normal business cycle fluctuation, that's a chokehold. At the same time, profits are falling. Official statistics show that aggregate corporate financial results dropped more than 8% year on year. The share of profitable companies is shrinking. Losses among unprofitable firms are surging by more than 30%. This is the kind of divergence that tells you something fundamental is breaking. Costs keep rising, revenues stagnate, and debt keeps piling up. Banks' credit claims and outstanding corporate bonds are approaching 100 trillion rubles. Let that number sink in, trillion. This is not leverage for growth, this is leverage for survival. In some sectors, the situation is outright absurd and critical. Construction companies, for example, owe nearly 6 times their annual operating profits. Automotive manufacturing, wood processing, and commercial services are all hovering 4 to 5 times. That means that even a small shock, a contract loss, a tax hike, a supply disruption can push them straight into default territory. And defaults are already rising as well. Nearly a quarter of borrowers now have overdue loans. In the beginning of 2025, it was under 18%. As you can see, that's not a warning sign, that's the warning siren already blaring at whole volume. The Kremlin-linked analysts themselves admit that profitability in industry is now close to the lows that was seen during the worldwide disease. But unlike the pandemic, there is no emergency relief, no global rebound waiting around the corner, no help from the government. This is happening in the economy already drained by war, sanctions, and labor shortages. Debt has stopped being a tool. It's become a trap. And guess what? The Kremlin still manages to sell the situation to the people as stability. But stable, exactly what? Stable decline, stable self-destruction? Let's talk about it in more details now next chapter. Now layer this debt crisis into the broader economy, and the picture gets even more dark. Growth has not just slowed, it's flatlining. GDP growth fell to 0.6% year on year in the most recent quarter, and even that growth is mostly fueled by just military spending. Strip out of defense orders, and that's it, you are left with the economy barely moving. In response, official institutions keep using the word cooling off. You probably heard even Putin saying that, as if this is some carefully managed adjustment, I don't know. But cooling implies that you can reheat it later. What Russia is experiencing looks much closer to stagnation, sliding towards recession. Industrial production is balancing on the knife's edge between zero growth and outright decline. Consumer demand is weakening. Investments in the civilian sector are effectively frozen. More than 30% of companies are now operating at a loss. And the reason is, well, quite obvious. Interest rates. High interest rates. For most of the just ended 2025, the benchmark rate set in the double digits, peaking above 20%. That may sound like responsible inflation-fighting policy on paper, but in practice it has crushed absolutely everything outside the military-industrial complex, as you would have guessed. Businesses that do not have access to subsidized state loans simply cannot borrow. Projects get delayed, equipment upgrades get cancelled. And which kind of equipment are we even talking about if Russia is the heaviest sanctioned country in the world with absolutely no access to Western technology anymore? Unless it's a contraband that is extremely expensive contraband, to say the least. Entire sectors shrink quietly while officials boast about macroeconomic balance. What makes this especially dangerous is that the slowdown is not cyclical. Analysts increasingly admit it is structural. Oil and gas revenues are under pressure from sanctions and price fluctuations. Natural gas exports are declining. The ruble's strength, ironically boosted by tight monetary policy, hurts exporters even more. Budget revenues struggle to keep up with war spending, and the government openly plans for deficits going forward. This is not a temporary dip. No way, by no means. It is a long corridor with no exit signs. What about the Central Bank of Russia, some of you might ask? Are they doing anything to help the economy? Surely they should do something, right? It's their job after all. Well, it's not exactly that. Let's talk about it in our next chapter. This brings us to the most revealing moment in this entire story. The central bank's decision to cut rates while simultaneously admitting that inflation risks remain high. On paper, the cut from 17 to 16.5% looks modest, symbolic even. But, well, symbols matter, especially in Russia. Especially when the institution itself all but admits it did not really want to do it. Read the official explanations carefully and they collapse under their own vagueness. Inflation remains above target. Inflation expectations are high. Lending activity is picking up. Fiscal risks are growing. Fuel prices are rising. Taxes are going up. Guess what? In any normal central bank, in any normal economy, central bank, this would be the perfect checklist for tightening the policy, not easing it. And the rate was cut anyway. The head of the Central Bank of Russia, Elvira Nabiullina, openly listed the risks and then just proceeded to ignore them. It seems like they don't just care anymore. They gave up doing extra work to save failing economy, which the Kremlin pushes even closer to the edge every single time. Central bank comes up with an extraordinary measure, and the Kremlin just says, no, this will not look good in propaganda. We have to maintain the illusion of stability for the people. This is what matters the most. And so, what do we have as a result? Budget deficits, fuel prices, tax hikes. None of these are short-term. None of them are resolving anytime soon. Military spending is untouchable, that's for sure. Sanctions are not disappearing, drone strikes on energy infrastructure are not stopping, and even value-added taxes hikes do not just cause one-time price jump. No, they permanently shift prices upward. Would the companies decrease the prices? No, why? The logic simply does not add up, which tells you something critical. This was not an economic decision, it was a political one. The state needs cheaper money, not for small business, not for households, but for itself, for propaganda. The draft federal budgets for the coming years make it painfully clear that expenditures will almost never match revenues, not in the near future. There is nothing left to cut except social spending, and even that has limits if you want to avoid unrest. So pressure shifts to the central bank, obviously. Loosen policy, take the blame for the inflation, buy time, and that is exactly what's happening. The central bank is being positioned as a scapegoat. When things go wrong, and eventually they will sooner or later, it's just easier to blame interest rates than to admit what is permanently a war economy is unsustainable. This is the chapter that matters the most probably, because it's about the future, not just the present. For years, Elvira Nabiullina was portrayed as one of the last technocrats standing between Russia and total financial chaos. She was given just enough independence to keep inflation in check and the system functional. Not because the Kremlin valued good economics, but because it needed stability to wage war. They basically told her, do whatever you want, just make things look alright. But that leash is now tightening, quietly, legally, methodically. Proposed changes to currency regulation laws, for example, would allow the president to impose restrictions on foreign currency transactions by decree. As if he understands a lot about the economy, I guess, I don't know. Not through the parliament, not through the central bank, no, by once again, personal order. That's not a technical amendment, that's a power shift. It places the finance ministry and the central bank on a collision course and signals that monetary policy is no longer off the limits. This is what fiscal dominance looks like. When budget needs dictate monetary decisions, when inflation control becomes secondary to financing deficits, when regulators stop being a brake and becomes an accelerator. I mean, history is full of examples of how this ends and, well, as you guessed it, none of them are pleasant. If the central bank fully loses independence, inflation will rise, businesses will close faster, real wages will stagnate or even fall, and paradoxically, this creates more social pressure to support the war, not less. Because when civilian life becomes unbearable, the army starts looking like an employer of last resort. You get food, salary, benefits for your family if you don't come back. The state does not just tolerate this dynamic, it relies on it. The central bank was never independent in the Western sense, but it had some kind of enough room to slow down the descent. Well, even that room now is shrinking. And once it's gone, economic logic stops mattering altogether. What we're watching in Russia right now is not just a sudden crash, it's a controlled unraveling. Corporate debt is stagnating, strangling profits. Growth is stalling. Investment is drying up. The civilian economy is being sacrificed to sustain a war machine that cannot stop without collapsing politically. And the very last institution, the central bank of Russia, capable of saying no, is being nudged, pushed, and cornered into just compliance. Do what we tell you, basically what's happening. Rate cuts will not fix this. Sanctions dodging will not fix this. Rebranding, stagnation, and stability obviously will not fix it. The system is eating itself one sector at a time. And when the central bank finally loses the ability to act independently, the pretense of balance will disappear entirely. At that point, the question will not be whether the Russian economy can recover. It will be how much damage will be done before reality is finally acknowledged. And well, judging by everything we have seen so far, that acknowledgement is still a long way off. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more just like this. If you wish to support our work, the links down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow. We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in